I hope you're ready for sentences lesson 3. Let me find my slideshow start button. All right, there it is. I was building this out after building the slide deck for sentences 2, and you'll recall that in that lesson we used a sentence about a person chasing a bear, and that got me all interested in having bears in my sentences. And then that reminded me about Bart the bear, who was a movie star bear. This is him. He died in 2000. Sorry, he died 22 years ago. But he was in a lot of movies and TV shows. And look, he's huge. Okay. Anyway, and it's weird to talk about bears, but it has happened, and I hope it's okay. Last time we talked, we looked at an example sentence that had this property, structural ambiguity. That is, two distinct meanings to the sentence that just depended on how you combined words together, right? So we've also now seen some different kinds of examples of noun phrases, verb phrase, predicates. We've talked about prepositions, prepositional phrases, and even a modifier or two. So what I want to do is dig into predicates a little bit more deeply. Predicates, that term predicate, it's a fancier word than verb, and that's because you don't have to be a verb to be a predicate, but most predicates are centered on verbs. So I'm gonna just use verbs. I'm just gonna do that thing. And if we want to look at other kinds of predicates, we can do that in class, or in, if you want, I can make another video about those. But for simplicity's sake, I want us to focus for now on predicates that are centered on verbs. And I'm using English examples again. But I hope you'll be thinking about other languages that you know, and how the verbs, how the predicates in your languages that have similar meanings to these English ones, how they work, whether they work in the same ways as the English ones do. They might not. I'm going to just say that in the predicates we've looked at in previous lessons, we had, remember, a sentence about eels wanting people to call them up. So we had the predicate want. And we also had the predicate chased. There's something that we have to know what the verb want or the verb chased means. Now, part of that is we have to know for want, we have to understand that want is like a psychological state. It's hard to define these basic words with other words, but to yearn, to desire, right? You got to know that information, but you also have to know that want, whatever it is, it needs somebody to do it. And it needs something to be wanted. Like, you can't have a wanting event without a wanter and a wanted. Even if you don't say both of those things in the sentence, you know that they have to exist, right? Same thing with chase. I can't chase unless I'm chasing something. I could chase my dog, I could chase a bug, I could chase myself, I could chase my thoughts. I could just be chasing all kinds of things all the time, but if I'm chasing, I have to be chasing something. It's just part of what the verb chase means. Chasing without a direct object is just running, right? I think. Okay, so want and chase in English are two different examples of the same kind of predicate, the same kind of verb. They're transitive verbs. Each involves two participants, someone doing the action, someone receiving the action. So we can call them two-place predicates, or we can call them transitive verbs. Want is a kind of verb. When you were a little kid and you learned the word want, you somehow learned that it needs both somebody doing it and something that's wanted. When you learn chase, you had to learn that there's somebody doing the chasing and there's somebody getting chased, right? So we call the argument that in English comes first in these simple sentences. So we say that English is a subject-verb-object language, or that it has SVO order. That's because in these very simple basic sentences, English really wants you to put the subject first and then the verb and then the direct object of the verb, right? But remember that the verb and its direct object, that's actually the predicate. So the predicate is centered on the verb, but it includes the verb and any objects of the verb, any participants. All right, so I've used this word argument here, and that's, I know it's a weird, it just means participant. The arguments of a verb are the participants that the verb needs. And usually, in these very simple cases we're going to discuss, the arguments are nouns or noun phrases, right? Not always, but often. So, a subject argument, a direct object argument. A subject argument, a direct object argument, right? Languages, so I don't think we linguists have ever encountered a language that lacks two-place predicates, transitive predicates. Everybody seems to have some of those. Everybody also seems to have some predicates that only require one participant. These are one-place predicates. We'll call them intransitive. So a predicate like roar or applaud, or we talked about wait before. When you learn these words in English, you learn that, okay, so for a roaring event to happen, there needs to be somebody roaring, and that's kind of it. You can add other information if you want, but really it's you just need that one participant. If there's applause, you really only need somebody to applause. Yeah, they might be applauding about or for something, but you can applaud and applaud for nothing. It's just this weird practice of clapping your hands together, right? So one-place predicates only require a subject, not a direct object. And again, this is part of the fundamental meaning inside the verb, which is the root or the base of these predicates. So we've seen two-place predicates, those are called transitive. We've seen one-place predicates, those are called intransitive. Lots of languages, maybe all languages, also have at least a few predicates that need three participants. These are much less frequent than one-place and two-place predicates, but they exist. And examples from English are the predicate give, the predicate by, I should say the verb give and its arguments, the verb by and its objects, its object arguments. So if there's a giving event, somebody has to do it, somebody has to receive the thing, and something has to be passed between those two participants, right? So I've put these sentences this way because what I want you to notice is that for our three-place predicates, we can put the verb with three noun phrases. In English is a rigid constituent order language. So in English, to do it this way, it's got to be the subject, then the verb, then the direct object, then the indirect object. We can switch the order of these two and say something like Doug gave an apple to Bart. But you notice that if we switch the order, we have to put a preposition in there, and prepositions are extra. So I'm trying to keep these as simple and straightforward as possible. 3 participants. Each participant is a noun phrase. The subject, of course, because we always seem to need a subject. And then a direct object and also an indirect object. So intransitive verbs, one-place predicates, we have a subject and some sort of event or state. Lots of verbs that describe position or motion are one-place predicates. Verbs that mean things like sit or run or sleep or stand. But there's lots of other kinds of one-place predicates. Two-place predicates, the transitive predicates, those are often verbs of transfer. So things like chase, hug. Linguists often, sadly, use verbs of violence as examples of transitive verbs because verbs of violence tend to be very transitive. Verbs like hit or kick, or even kill. Right, two-place predicates. But there's lots of different kinds of meanings that can be encoded in transitive or two-place predicates. The meanings of three-place predicates are almost all involving some sort of, it's a transfer of a thing, right? So there's a giver, there's a beginning, there's an end, and then there's a thing that has to move between the beginning and the end. And ditransitive or three-place predicates almost always have those kinds of meanings. All right, so we've got one-place predicates, intransitives, two-place predicates, transitives, three-place predicates, ditransitives. And remember, I'm giving you example sentences for each, but I'm not saying that in every sentence you have in your language, all of those arguments are going to be said out loud. We'll talk in another lesson about times when you can leave some of these arguments out of the sentence. But what makes these verbs, give and buy, for example, three-place predicates, it's their meaning. It's their meaning. So even if you don't say the arguments out loud, your listener is going to understand that they exist, and your listener is going to construct those arguments based on context, based on general knowledge, etc. Right? So this is about the meanings of verbs and the kinds of predicates that they build. Now, there are also examples where you can have a predicate, a verb, that seems to not require any argument at all, not even a subject. And these are verb meanings that often are verbs about like things that are happening in an environment that nobody's doing, but they're just happening. So whether verbs are often zero-place predicates. Zero-place predicates are interesting because in most, but not all, languages, even though the verb doesn't require a subject, when I say it rained, I just mean rain, and it happened in the past. I don't want to say that anybody did it, it just happened. I still have to put the little pronoun in here. I have to say it rained. I don't know what it is. It's just something that my language wants me to put in there. And a lot of linguists have used these kinds of predicates to argue that there's something very, very special about subjects in sentences. Subjects are important. that they're a crucial part of a sentence. So when we say things like a sentence is a unit that includes at least a subject and a predicate, see, even when you don't need the subject, it's there. And if I'm correctly understanding this example from the Givon reference grammar, it looks to me like "ute" also requires zero place predicates to appear with this little pronoun, this little empty pronoun. It translates into English maybe as something like "it," right? So that's very common. Now here's the part where you should have a nightmare about why is language like this. It appears to be the case that the words that we build predicates from in natural languages, the kinds of predicates we get are zero place predicates, or else one place predicates, or else two place predicates, or else three place predicates, and that is all. Even though we regularly want to describe events in the world that should, if I was going to make up a language, I would really love to have a single verb, give, that meant not just a subject, a direct object, and an indirect object, but also a beneficiary, right? Like it's a giving, would restrict giving to giving that's done on behalf of somebody. That's a very normal kind of meaning to try to say in a sentence. And in English, if I wanted to say a sentence like that on the verb give, which is a three-place predicate, I would say I, that's the subject, gave, that's the verb, mom, direct object, a hug, indirect object. And then to get that fourth participant in there to say I'm doing this on your behalf, I have to use a prepositional phrase. Right? That's how I have to do it. This is really a modifier. It's not an argument of give, it's extra information. It adds, and linguists will name this kind of meaning a benefactive. You've built out a sentence where the meaning of the sentence includes that you're doing the predicate on behalf of or to benefit somebody, right? What a four-place predicate would allow us to do is to make a sentence with just those noun phrases without having to add another element to make a modifier, right? And nobody does this. It's surprising because this should be very easy to do. But we don't. Language doesn't, apparently. Lots of languages let you build out this kind of structure by adding a little morpheme, a little benefactive morpheme. But that's typically, again, a modifier of the predicate. You can say the predicate without the benefactive and it's fine, or you can add the benefactive morpheme and make a modified version, right? But we just don't have four-place predicates, and at least not yet, and maybe we'll make some up because they would be fun. All right. Zero place, one place, two place, and three place predicates. That's what we talked about here. And I hope I haven't lost you. I hope I'll see you again in the next video.